Hello and welcome. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining Demystifying Taxes and Voting for Americans Abroad. My name is Rebecca Lammers. I am the chair of the Democrats Abroad Taxation Task Force. I'll tell you a little bit more about our volunteer-led group here in a minute, but at the moment, we're going to go straight into the presentation here. One thing for those of you that are attending live to let you know, we are going to be hosting a live voter assistance Zoom room right after this webinar concludes. So if you are not yet registered to vote or you haven't done that this year, then what you can do is you can actually click on the link that hopefully is in the chat box, and you can attend and get one-to-one assistance in a breakout room on a Zoom in order to register to vote in US elections this year. So I'll remind you guys again at the end, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. If anybody doesn't have to run off after we finish, please do consider going and attending to get registered today. So before we get started, I'm going to read this disclaimer. Democrats abroad cannot provide individual tax advice. Advice requires consideration of your individual circumstances and needs, none of which can be done at this event. We are not tax lawyers, accountants, or advisors. Please consult a professional tax advisor, accountant, return preparer when addressing your personal tax matters. Democrats abroad does not endorse or recommend companies or individuals attending or hosting this event. If you are in need of tax advice, you can consult the IRS Tax Return Preparer directory to find an advisor or tax return preparer near you, or providing online services to meet your needs and budget. Democrats abroad accepts no liability for any actions taken or not taken by participants in this event as a result of information obtained at this event or from a participant choosing a preparer, either from the IRS directory or based on something someone said or did at this event. Great. So now that we have the introductions and housekeeping out of the way, I'm going to go into the presentation, which will take about a half an hour. I'll then do a Democrats Abroad public service announcement to tell you a bit more about Democrats Abroad, and then we will wrap up with a 20-minute Q&A. So a little bit about me. So I'm a volunteer, so I'm not getting paid to do this. I'm also not a tax professional. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I'm not any of those things. Basically, what happened was I got burned with the IRS, and I got really fed up with how complicated the tax system was, and I decided to do something about it. And so that has what led me to volunteering for Democrats Abroad. I have been the chair of the Democrats Abroad Taxation Task Force for the last 2 years. And I've also been the international member of the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel, which is a federal advisory committee of the IRS. I will tell you about more of those committees and what they do later on. But just so that you know, I'm not a tax professional. I cannot give advice. This is general information for you to be aware of. And I'm just like you, basically, but got fed up and wanted to do something about it. So that's where I'm coming from. So we're going to start out with a poll. And the first poll here, I'm going to go ahead and launch it here, is if you vote in federal elections only, so federal elections are for president, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, are you liable for state taxes? And so the answers are yes, no, or I don't know. It's okay if you don't know. That's why you're here, right? So I'm just going to leave that up for about maybe 20 more seconds, depending on how many people answer. I can see the answer. We've had about half the people answer now. So I'll give you guys a few more seconds here, but it's always really interesting to see and hear where people are at with what they think of this. And think we pretty much have had enough people answer now. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll so you guys can see the answers. So hopefully you can see them. So most people have said no, followed by I don't know, followed by yes. So the answer is no. If you vote in federal elections only, so president, House of Representatives, and Senate, you are not liable for state taxes. So that's that one. So we're going to do one more question, which is question number 2. So I've never lived in the US, but I'm a US citizen. Can I vote in US elections? So what do you think? Yes, no, I don't know. Nobody's tracking your answers here, so you can answer truthfully. If you don't know, that's okay. A lot of people don't know. So, oh, you guys are getting good at this. Your questions are coming in, or your answers are coming in a lot faster now. So I see a lot of yeses coming in. So, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end it because you guys are pretty fast on this, and I'll share the results, which is so most of you said yes, followed by I don't know. So most of you were right. That is correct. Yes, if you've never lived in the US and you are a US citizen, you can vote in US elections. So this question came up a lot in your pre-submitted questions. So I'm going to go into this in a lot more detail, but I'm going to take a step back here and just kind of talk about both voting and taxes in a kind of separate context. And we're going to start with the different types of US taxes. So there are federal, state, and local taxes in the US. So the federal is the national level taxes. Basically, that's what everybody is responsible for. And then you can have state taxes. So some states don't have taxes, some states do. Some states have just a sales tax. So the really annoying thing when you go to the US and they say, oh, it's $5, and then once they ring it up, it's actually $5.43 or something like that. So, sales tax, things like that. And then your local taxes. So a lot of people will pay local taxes for like the local school system or what have you. So those obviously just really, really super high level, different levels of US taxes that exist here. And then going deeper into the federal level of taxes, and this was another thing that really came up in your pre-submitted questions is there's a lack of understanding in terms of Americans' tax obligations, in particular when it comes to being an American abroad. So just take it from, again, very high level here. All Americans must file a US tax return with the IRS for federal taxes. Again, that's the national taxes. So this applies if you are a US citizen, an American abroad, a dual citizen, so you have American citizenship as well as another citizenship, even if you have two other citizenships, just regardless of however you identify, if you are an American citizen and you have US citizenship, then you are liable and are required to pay US taxes. That's how it works. This applies to you even if you don't have a US passport, if you've never gotten a US Social Security number before, you were born abroad to an American parent and they didn't register your birth at the nearest American embassy. So that's it happens. And sometimes I've heard from people who have been like, oh, well, I choose not to identify as an American. I'm just laying out the laws and the rules in terms of how it works and operates. If you are a US citizen, you are obliged and required to pay and file US taxes. That's how it works. So just to kind of go into a little bit more detail here, some reminders, given that today is April 15th, and in the US, today is the deadline for paying and filing a US tax return to the IRS. So if you live in the United States, today is the deadline. And fun fact, America is a nation of procrastinators. This is the #1 day that most people file their US tax return. That said, if you are an American abroad and you live outside of the United States, Today is actually not the filing deadline. Today is the payment deadline. So if you actually owe any US tax, then you would make your payment today. Most people will pay as well as file at the same time because you have to do the calculations in the forms that you fill out to then determine how much tax you owe to the US. And so a lot of people pay and file at the same time. So some of you may have already done that. Maybe you did it before you joined this webinar, or maybe you're going to do it after. And that's fine, but you actually don't have to. You have until June 17th this year, which is the expat tax filing deadline. We get an additional 2 months to file our taxes. Don't ask me why. My best guess is that historically everybody had to mail their tax return, and they were taking into consideration the additional time required to mail something in the mail back to the United States from wherever in the world. And so that's why we have additional time. But even if you can't make either of those deadlines, you have until October 15th to file an extension. And you can file your extension up to June 17th. So we as Americans abroad have that extra benefit that the IRS grants to us to give us those extra periods of time to file. So one of the things I also wanted to highlight, given that there seemed to be a number of people who were unaware of their US tax filing obligation, now that I've kind of covered the really bare bones basics, this webinar isn't to go into detail about how to file. If you are interested in learning more about that, we previously hosted 2 other webinars earlier this year. One was how to survive tax day. So today is tax day, so how to survive tax day. And that recording is available for a small donation, as well as if you haven't been filing for a number of years, there is a catch-up program for Americans abroad. And so we hosted another webinar on that earlier this year on how to catch up. So you're very welcome to go and make a donation, and then you will be able to watch those recordings. So the first thing I would say is don't freak out. You're actually in the majority if you have not been filing a US tax return. If you look at the statistics, there's an estimated 9 million Americans living abroad. And last year there was 1.2 million tax returns that were filed from abroad. So if you were filing your taxes, you are actually in the minority. However, that is what we are legally obliged to do. Additionally, keep in mind that the majority of Americans abroad don't actually owe any US tax, but the requirement is that you need to file to prove that you've paid tax in your country of residence to then therefore ensure that you are not obliged to file, or sorry, to pay US tax. So I know it sounds crazy. I know for some people this might seem new, and you might be very worried or concerned at this point, but I'd like to assure you that this is a very common situation, so you shouldn't be. There's the catch-up program that exists because the IRS knows that this is a common issue. And so the best thing that you can do is educate yourself and better understand what your tax filing obligations are at this stage. So that's the best thing that you can do at this point. So I just wanted to kind of cover that basic in terms of the tax side of things. So shifting over to the voting from abroad angle. So not only do Americans abroad have to file and pay US tax, that's what we're obliged to do. On the other hand, all Americans have the right to vote in US federal elections. So again, those are national elections. And we have the right to vote in these elections, regardless of whether you have resided in the US or not. A lot of people don't realize that they're dual citizen children who are adult children who are over the age of 18 and are eligible to vote in US elections can vote. So this might be something that you may not have heard of before, but is definitely something worth speaking to your adult children about. Um, you can vote regardless of how long you've lived abroad. You can live abroad. I've talked to some people who have lived abroad for 40, 50 years, and they're exercising their right to vote in the United States, and they are allowed to do that because there is no time limit. You can vote in US elections whether your birth was registered at the American Embassy or not. That does not matter. And additionally, it doesn't matter if you have a US Social Security number or not as well. You don't need one to exercise your right to vote in US elections. So you have the right to vote in these elections, and your right to vote is protected under a law called the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, or UOCAVA for short. And under this law, it protects all citizens' rights to vote in federal elections who are residing outside of the United States. It really is that simple. That's how it works. So the best way in order to register to vote from abroad is to go to votefromabroad.org. And I mentioned earlier that we're going to be having the Zoom rooms that you can attend after, but if you don't have time and you need to run off, the best way to register to vote is to go to votefromabroad.org. And if you have any questions or need any kind of voter assistance, you can email voterhelp at votefromabroad.org. And we have lots of volunteers that are on standby that are very happy to answer any questions that you have to help you with registering. Okay, so a little bit more about voting. So how do you receive your ballot from abroad? So there's two different ways that you will receive your ballot. And the way that you register to vote is based on your last US address before you moved abroad. Again, even if it was 40 years ago, even if that building doesn't exist anymore, that is your voting address, and you can still vote from that address. So you register to vote on the state level, and then and for those of you that may have never lived in the United States, you would vote based on your parents, your American parents' last address in the US. And again, it doesn't matter if your parent isn't alive anymore. It doesn't matter if that building doesn't exist anymore. Some people that we've heard from couldn't find the address, but they were born in the US, so they used the hospital's address. Some other people may decide, oh, well, I don't have any connections in that state, and so they decide to register. They have mail going to their brother or sister that lives in Florida, or something like that. And so that if that's where your mail goes, you can register to vote there. That's as long as you have a US address, that is how you register. And then when you register, you sign up to receive either your ballot emailed to you or by postal mail. And really what we recommend that you do is you sign up for that email ballot. And the reason for that is that overseas mail is slow. It can take a very long time for your ballot to be received, and then you have to mail it back. You only have 45 days before the election, and then different states have different rules in terms of at what point in time is the cutoff, either before or after the election itself, in terms of when they will accept the ballot. You really want to reduce any chances of your ballot not being received and not being counted. So this is one of the reasons why we really recommend that people tick the box to receive an emailed ballot. I know it's not as nostalgic or not as like fun as getting the actual like ballot printed out and where you can feel it and smell it. Like I know that that can feel really exciting to actually get that, but it's too risky to wait for the postal ballot to come in the mail and then to send it back and then for it to possibly not be counted. So we really do recommend that you get it emailed and then you print it out and then you can mail it back that way. So we talked about how you receive the ballot. So how do you return your ballot? So there's three different ways. It can be emailed to you, it can be mailed by postal mail, or I know fax, but I don't know why the US government really loves fax and they still use it. So you can fax your ballot back. However, these three options don't exist in every state. So each state has different criteria in terms of whether they will receive it back by email, postal mail, or fax. So like Colorado and Washington state allow you to email it back so you can get it back like on the same day that they send it to you. Most states, however, do require that you mail a physical ballot back. So we really, again, recommend that once you receive it, it's a required, all states are required by law to send you the ballot 45 days before the election. And so we really recommend that when you get that email and you print it out, you mail it back as soon as possible, like that day, ideally, so that it has the best chance of getting back to your local election officials so that it can be counted either before or by the election. And then faxing, really, it's a good backup option if your state allows faxing. Um, but it's not normally used as the standard way to return your ballot. And I'll just show you this handy map that the Vote from Abroad team made in terms of which states allow which uh, how they send you the ballot and the options. So you can see that some of them are you have to print it out. Some of them don't require printing. So you have different options and everyone must print, etc. So you can look at whichever your state is and then determine what the options are. And then conversely, in terms of returning your ballot, this is the map in terms of what state allows for what return methods. So like I vote in Ohio, and Ohio requires that I have to mail my ballot back. So I always tick the box to receive an emailed ballot. I then get it emailed to me 45 days in advance. I then print it out the same day and then ideally go to the post office and mail it back as soon as possible. So there you go. So what does a ballot look like? So most of the time when you get a US ballot, it has three different sections on the ballot. So there's the federal elections, like we talked about earlier, but these are voting for president, for the House of Representatives, as well as for the Senate. You may also receive state and local elections on your ballot as well. So state elections are normally for the state governor, for the state house and the state senate. And then local elections will be something like the mayor or city council. I've even had like school board elections on my ballot. So things like that. Okay, so again, kind of we've gone over the basics of how to vote. So hopefully you're really clear on that. Your again, just to reiterate that your right to vote in federal elections is protected under UOCAVA. So every American abroad has a right to vote in all federal elections. No disputing that. So shifting focus to state taxes and voting. So this is where we get a lot of people emailing saying, oh, I don't want to be liable for state tax. So when they send me the ballot, I just don't vote in the state and local elections. Well, I'm here to debunk that myth because it's not, it is a myth. So in the same way that you as an American citizen are liable for federal elections, equally, you could be liable for state tax. Again, even if you've lived abroad for a very long time. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but it varies per state, basically. And there is no one straightforward way to answer this question. It really does come down to your personal circumstances, but I'm going to kind of walk you through the kind of top ways of determining if you could be liable for state tax. And this is done through asking four different questions. So the first question is, what box did you tick on your absentee ballot when you registered to vote? Does your state have income tax in the first place? Because a lot of states don't. Uh, Third, what is your state's definition of a resident? And fourth, does your state even allow you to vote down ballot? So when I say vote down ballot, that means voting in state and local elections. So when you register to vote, this is what the voter registration form looks like at the top. And you'll see this section here in the middle here where it says, I request an absentee ballot for all elections in which I am eligible to vote. And then you need to tick one of these boxes. And essentially, the way it works is a lot of people will tick this box because they don't know if they're going to go back to the United States. But equally, people can also tick the box above it, which is I'm a US citizen living outside the country and I intend to return. So depending between those two boxes, which one you tick then determines which elections appear on your ballot, because some states will send you all of the elections regardless of whichever box you tick. And then some states will, if you tick my return is uncertain, they'll only send you the federal elections. They won't send you the state and local elections. So again, this depends on your state. So you'll need to, I think there's a very handy, you can go on the Vote from Abroad website and there's a way to see whether or not your state will send you the full ballot or not. But that's how it works. And then on top of that, some states have no income tax. So there's no state taxes to worry about. And it's these 9 states. None of these states have income tax. So if you live in if you lived in one of these states, or your American parent lived in one of these states and you're registered to vote in one of these states, it literally doesn't matter which box you tick on this form, because there's no state tax liability. And that's how it works. No income tax in those states, no problem. And then in terms of establishing state residency, every state has a different definition of residency. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to figure out if you're still considered a resident. So you can look up your state's definition of resident. And there's information on a lot of states' websites. Another way to look into it is to contact a state tax accountant. Not all expat accountants know about state taxes. There are state tax professionals that specifically work on those specific states, so keep that in mind. If you're going to go to your expat accountant who is in the country that you live in, they may not necessarily know, so just keep that in mind. One of the best ways to determine if you are a state resident is to ask your state's tax administrator. So I put a link to the list of all of the state's tax administrators, and then you can contact them, and then they will tell you. So every state has a different definition. So, and yes, in some states, even if you haven't lived in the US for decades, you can still be considered a resident. So this is a common thing that we hear from people, especially from California and Virginia. They're known as a sticky state. So it's very difficult to prove that you are no longer a state resident of those states. I'm actually in the process of writing a blog post going into more detail about the state taxes. You can see a draft of that post. I only have 14 more states to do on the list, and then I'm going to publish the blog. But if you're in one of the states that I've already done, then you can go and check that out and look at it. So I've kind of saved you a few steps in terms of looking at what your particular state defines as a resident. So here's the thing. Some states use voting as a piece of criteria to establish that you are a state resident. However, not all states do. The state could use voting as a piece of criteria, but they can't use it as the sole piece of criteria to establish residency in that state and therefore tax liability. A lot of states will use a wide range of criteria, which does include voting in the state. But it also includes if you have a state driver's license, if you have a library card, if you own property there. You cannot just look at voting in isolation to therefore determine state tax liability, state tax residency, and therefore state tax liability. They don't do that. So if you don't have any other connections, again, your right to vote is protected under federal law. It's up to the state whether they send you the state and local elections on the ballot. If you vote in state and local elections, your vote is private. There's no way for them to know if you're voting in the state and local elections. So going back to the whole idea of people saying, oh, well, I'm not going to vote in state and local elections because I don't want to be liable for state tax. If your only connection to the state is voting in that state, there's no way that they're going to know that you've voted in the state and local elections if they sent you the ballot and that's how your state does it. So there's not really any connection. Again, this is not something that can be used in isolation. That's not how it works. And here I've taken a quote from the Federal Voter Assistance Program. So just to kind of say it in a different way, voting in an election for federal offices may not be used as the sole basis to determine residency for the purpose of imposing state and local taxes. If you claim a particular state as your residence and have other ties to that state in addition to voting, you may be liable for state and local taxation depending on that particular state law. If you are unsure of your voting residence, or if you are concerned about the tax implications of claiming a specific voting residence, you should consult legal counsel. Now, again, you also have the option of just contacting your local state tax authority and asking them, and they will be very happy to help you. So going back, we'll do two quick case studies here. There are no state taxes in these 9 states. So if you tick the I intend to return box, they'll all send you the state tax, the state elections. If you tick the return not certain box, then some of them won't send you the state elections. So I'll give you an example here. When Beto O'Rourke was running for governor in Texas, I ran into a woman here in London who was like, oh yeah, I'm voting in Texas. I wish I could vote for Beto though. And I was just like, well, what do you mean? And she's like, oh, well, I don't know if I'm going to go back. And they said, so I intend, my return isn't certain. And, there's, I would really like to vote for him, but I don't know if I'm going back. So they're not going to send me the state elections on my ballot because that's how it works. And I was just like, well, do you like just because you don't know if you're certain, like, is there any possibility, like if even like a 1% possibility that you might go back? And she was like, oh yeah, I never know. And I was like, well, if you just if you send a new ballot and update it and just tick the I intend to return box, then you can vote for Beto. And she was like, oh, I never thought of it that way. And I was like, yeah, like, why not? Like, there are some really critical elections, state level elections for governor in particular, where the votes are so close these days. Every vote matters. So if your state does that, nobody's going to chase you down or pin you down and be like, oh, you have to return. Like this, it really is based on how you feel. So you can tick the box. I know I've gone back and forth some years where sometimes I've been like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go back, and then other years I've been like, oh, I don't know. And like, so it's just you can tick whatever box. There's no like set rule on how it works. So that's for like the no tax states. And then kind of switching over to like an example of a sticky state. With California, they have very, very detailed, very thorough different consideration factors that they take under consideration to determine if you are a state resident or not. So I've just kind of highlighted some of these. And like they include voting as a piece of criteria. But again, they can't use this in isolation, so um don't be you need to consider all of your personal factors. This is why it's so hard. We get emails from people a lot of the time and they're just like, oh, are they gonna hunt me down for state tax? Well, I mean, I'm not your I don't know all of your personal circumstances, so I can't answer that, but here's some information and there's some resources and you could potentially figure it out for yourself. So that's the presentation. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to open up the Q&A so you can all submit any questions that you have. I'm going to take a few minutes here to just tell you a little bit more about Democrats Abroad, and then we will go into the Q&A. So is the Q&A working? Should be. I'm going to assume that it is. Okay, so right, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Taxation Task Force. So basically, we're a group of volunteers located all over the world, and we advocate for a switch to residency-based taxation, which means people don't have to file to prove that they owe no US tax. Eliminating the FATCA reporting of foreign accounts for Americans abroad, an exemption for American business owners living abroad from the GILTI and transition tax, as well as many other areas of double taxation and discrimination experienced by Americans abroad in the tax code. You can read more about our work on our blog. Some of the things that we do for you is we actually wrote a report. We host tax education webinars like this. We submit statements for the record for congressional hearings. We also do candidate outreach and education, as well as visit Washington, D.C. to talk to Congress, the IRS, and Treasury. So the report I mentioned, you can go and read it. It was actually based off of a survey of almost 7,000 Americans abroad that we summarized the results. And if you have been wondering, why is it so complicated? Why are things the way they are? This report will really help clarify. And a lot of people that we hear from who have read this report have told us that they've felt a lot less alone in their struggles with their taxes. So just again, a reminder that we have a number of recordings that are available for a small donation. A few of them are also available for free that you can go and check out. Again, just highlighting how to catch up on filing US taxes from abroad for those of you that are just now discovering about your US tax filing obligation. We also have a number of country-specific tax webinar recordings, and we have one coming up in France here in a few weeks, so you can go and check out more of those. Just to take a few minutes here to tell you about the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel, which is a federal advisory committee to the IRS. It's a group of volunteers, at least one per state, including one international member, which is myself. And basically what we do is we submit ideas and suggestions to the IRS, and they are required to listen to us by law and respond. They don't always accept everything, but they do listen. And we submit ideas to improve communication and customer service. So some of you may have seen my blog under the Taxpayer Advocacy Panel, but a number of articles that I've written in terms of helping people save money on their tax preparation costs, including free ways to file for Americans abroad. I'm also working on a few other blogs coming up, so if you subscribe to the blog, you can find out more. And you can always submit ideas and suggestions to improve the IRS at improveirs.org. And then we also have some international taxpayer problem solving days coming up in May and September. So if you're struggling with your taxes and you have a question, you can show up. There's no cost. It doesn't matter what your income level is or what, you can just come, ask a case advocate from the Taxpayer Advocate Service, and they will be able to answer your tax question. So a reminder again that this is a critical election year, and we are trying to get everyone out to vote, especially for November. Although, as I said before, you get your ballot 45 days in advance. So voting from abroad actually starts in September. So remember to vote, and you can follow us on social media in order to get reminders throughout the year. And 7 small actions that you can take to help improve the tax system for Americans abroad. I won't go through them now, but lots of different ways for you to stay in the loop, educate yourself, and help us in the cause. And again, just a reminder about going to the voter Zoom assistance after we conclude the webinar here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the questions, but I'm going to leave the feedback form up on the screen here so that people remember to fill in the feedback form. Okay, so I'm gonna do my best, and but if I don't know the answer to the question, I'm gonna say I don't know. So, oh, and don't forget to like the questions. I'm not seeing very many likes, so that's my fault. Make sure that you go through and you like the questions that you want to hear from the most. If you don't have a question, that's okay. You can go through and like them too. So it just depends on what you want to hear the most. So I'm just going to take the one from the top. It says, hi, still not clear that just voting in federal elections means for paying taxes. So your right to vote is protected under the law that I mentioned, UOCAVA. So voting in federal elections has absolutely nothing to do with your right to vote, and it has nothing to do with your obligation to file a US tax return and pay US taxes. That is something that is required under US law. So they're not connected at all. It's a misnomer, basically. Are you required to register to vote in the last state you lived in, or one can choose, for example, a previous state to that one? So, well, I'll give you an example. So before I moved abroad, I, I was a student and I did a summer internship in New York State. I registered to vote from my mom's address in Ohio because that's where I have my driver's license and where I go to when I visit the US the most. So, it's up to you, whatever you feel most comfortable with, basically. Is there an amnesty period for people who have not filed tax return in the last 10 years, but did file for 15 years before that and owed no income tax due to that earlier time and not expected last 10 years? So basically, if you didn't know that you were supposed to file a tax return in the last 10 years, then you can do the amnesty program. The way it works is you only backfile the last 3 years, even if you haven't filed the last 10 years. They only want the last 3 years for you to get caught up. You also do 6 years of the FBAR if you have in aggregate over $10,000 in any non-US bank accounts. So it's 3 years of backfiling plus 6 years of FBARs. So that's how the amnesty or the backfiling program works. And it's called the streamlined filing procedure. That's what it's called. How can I get a US Social Security number for my Austrian wife while we are still living in Austria, so I can report this on my taxes? Right. You cannot, if your Austrian wife is not a US citizen, then she would not get a social security number. A social security number is only available for US residents. You can get what is called an ITIN. However, most people who are married to a non-US citizen tend to file married filing separately so that they're not including their non-US spouse in the reporting. I mean, there are circumstances where you may want to file jointly because you can get some additional credits and exemptions and things like that. But for the most part, most people, including myself, file married filing separately because they don't want to be reporting their non-US spouse. What I will do is I will include a link to my blog post that I wrote about filing statuses, and that goes into more detail about when and where you may or may not want to file with your non-US spouse. But basically, there's instructions on the IRS website if you do want to obtain an ITIN. Okay. I would like to copy paste all the sites mentioned, but cannot do this. Is there a way to make that possible? You will, in the follow-up email, receive a list of links that were shared in the chat, along with the recording. So you will get all of those. Yeah. And then I've been filing taxes abroad for many years via paper, then switched to free online filing. For the last year and this filing cycle, it is requiring payment because I have a negative operating income only earning abroad. Has anyone found a site to file for free, regardless of circumstances? So one of the blog posts I mentioned was how to file for free as an American abroad. That blog post will be included in the follow-up list of links. What is the US filing requirement for people who are solely living on retirement income and Social Security? So it varies, but basically if you're over the filing income requirement, it's slightly higher for retirees, but not that much more. For the most part, most retirees do actually still need to file every year, but you don't actually owe any US tax. However, it does kind of depend on where your retirement income is, whether it's in your country of residence or in the US. And it also depends on what the tax treaty is in terms of who has primary right to tax what for your country. And so one of the best ways in order to determine if you need to file a US tax return or not is there's a tool on the IRS website called Do I Need to File? And I will include a link to that in the follow-up materials so that you can use that. I can't get to it right now because I'm sharing my screen, but that will be sent to you after with the recording. Since it seems that tax reform for Americans abroad has been mostly ignored, or if any, little has changed for the better, if that's true, could there be a class action suit brought against the US by Americans abroad because of all the injustices we experience? I mean, there have been a number of court cases that have gone through in terms of fighting against some of the injustices against Americans abroad in the tax code. To be honest, we are getting traction with our issues. There's a number of members of Congress who are supportive of Americans abroad and reforming taxes in order to help us. Congressman Donald Byer is one of them. We actually had a webinar with him last year, which you can check out on the Democrats Abroad YouTube channel. And there's a number of areas that we're exploring in terms of making it easier for Americans abroad and eliminating the double taxation. So it's an iterative process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. Um, Personally, I'm not a huge fan of lawsuits. They're very expensive. And if you look at the history of the American abroad, like court cases that have been brought forward, and basically none of them have been won. Very few have been won. So it's a very time-consuming and costly exercise that doesn't yield great results. So that's why a lot of the work and effort that we put in within the taxation task force is on congressional outreach and impressing on members of Congress that we need change and reform sooner rather than later. And one of the best ways to do that is for you to write to your members of Congress and to vote. By voting, you're reminding them that we exist. And also, I should have said this earlier, but every vote from abroad matters. This is one of the key critical reasons that Americans abroad all need to vote is the more of us that vote, the more that members of Congress will pay attention to us, and the sooner they will pass laws in order to change the tax code for us. And it doesn't matter whether you vote in the bluest of blue states or the reddest of red states, every vote from abroad matters. Every American abroad vote matters because I take those statistics, and those statistics are publicly available, and every single meeting that we go into in Congress, we share those statistics and we say, this is how many of your constituents voted from abroad. And there are most likely 10 times more out there that didn't vote. But this gives you a good idea of how many people there are affected by this issue. And it helps them then rank and prioritize out of all of the issues that are being that they're being contacted about, and ideally gets them to move. So sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but hopefully that helps clarify. If you do not owe US taxes because your income is under the standard deduction, but you still have not filed like you should have, can voting alert the IRS to file? This is a question I hear from people who do not want to vote. The IRS as a government agency is not allowed to exchange information with your local election official in your state. It does not happen. It's as simple as that. So this is another misnomer. This is another myth that is spread. And a lot of these are voter suppression myths because they don't want you to vote. Any of your friends who have said that or are concerned about that, please let them know that their vote is protected under UOCAVA and that they should vote. Okay. So we have 5 more minutes. I'm going to try to get through as many as I can here. So I am a US citizen who pays US taxes and votes in US elections and has 3 children abroad. They have not been registered at a US embassy and they have not applied to be a US citizen, and they are now all age over 18. Do they need to pay US taxes? If so, is it too late for them to become US citizens? So you do not become a US citizen based off of being registered at a US embassy. You are US citizen by birth. Registering them at the embassy only gives you that piece of paper that confirms that they are an American citizen. So as I said at the beginning of the webinar, every American citizen is required by law to pay and file US taxes. That has nothing to do with your exercising your right to vote. So even if your children don't have a US Social Security number, they can vote. If they now decide to come into compliance with filing their US taxes, one of the requirements is that you do need a US Social Security number. What I would recommend is that you watch the How to Catch Up on Filing Taxes webinar that we hosted, and that will most likely clarify a lot of the questions that you have. Okay, so next question. If I've given up my state driver's license and have no property but still have a bank account in that state, is that a strong factor for a state to consider me a resident, even if I haven't lived there in decades? It depends on the state. It really does depend on the state. And any other variables or factors that connect you to that state. So somebody followed up and said, you can vote in the state in which you last lived, no matter if you haven't lived there, no matter if you don't live there or how long you have not lived there, you can vote. That is correct. So that's how it works. Who is my member of Congress that I can gripe to? Is it where I'm registered to vote? Yes, it is based on where you last lived in the US. So that is who you should go and complain to, 100%. What if I can't afford to pay for the accountants to prepare everything for back filing? I am being quoted at $300 per tax year, going back however many years. That is more than my retirement income in a week. So it is possible to do it yourself. And again, I will include a link to the free file options available for Americans abroad, especially if you're a retiree, then you have a very simple situation most likely, and you should be able to file yourself for free. Okay. There's a thank you. Okay. Uh, if you're an expat living abroad, the date to file the FBAR is the same as the June date to file your return, correct? The deadline to file the FBAR is October 15th every year. So even if you file in June, you still have until October 15th to file the FBAR. But a lot of people do it at the same time because it's just easier to get it out of the way. I last lived in Idaho back in 2018, was registered to vote from Switzerland, but now moving to France. I'd like to switch to vote in Minnesota where my business is registered, created an LLC last year. What do you recommend I do to switch to vote from Minnesota? Family is there too. All you do is you just go and you register with the local election official. If actually, sorry, if you go to votefromabroad.org, you put in the Minnesota address, and then it will go, you will be given the address to send your voter registration to. So it will do all of the work for you to help you get registered in Minnesota. I am an American living in Germany. My husband is German. Our daughters have both American and German citizenship. Do they have to file taxes in the US? They have never lived there. My older daughter, 19 years old, owns stocks through her German bank account. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, I know that this is potentially a shocker, but everyone, regardless of if they've lived in the US or not, if you have US citizenship, you are liable and are required by law to pay and file US taxes. This is one of the reasons why the Democrats Abroad Taxation Task Force exists, because we do not think that is fair. And so we are advocating for the laws to change. And the only way to do that is if more people vote from abroad and we show that more of us exist, then we will get heard more through our vote. Okay. We'll do, oh, sorry, I'm one minute over. I'll do one more question. Can I unregister myself from one state and register only for federal? I may not be the best person to answer this one, but my understanding uh, is you just register in the state that you want to vote in. You may want to go to the voter assistance Zoom room after this to get that clarified for you. Great. So I'm sorry we couldn't get through all of the questions. There were a lot of repeat questions, but hopefully that helps clarify. You are going to get the pre-submitted questions emailed to you as well. So anybody that pre-submitted questions, you'll get answers through that as well. Yeah. I hope this was helpful. Obviously, if you have any follow-up questions, you can contact us at taxationtf@democratsabroad.org. Again, I'd like to remind you to fill in the feedback form before you go today. You can go to the voter Zoom room, which is now open. And yeah, hopefully getting everybody here to vote and vote in all of the elections on your ballot, because voting and taxes have nothing to do with each other. So with that, thank you very much for attending and have a good rest of the day, evening, weekend, or sorry, day, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for attending. Bye.